Morning came to the apartment in Cedar Park at 5:30, announced by the cough that had become Zara's alarm clock for the past 3 days. Elijah woke before the sound fully registered that particular parent instinct that sensed distress before it arrived. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed in accusatory red numbers that marked time running out in more ways than one. Her bedroom door stood slightly ajar, the nightlight casting a yellow glow across carpet that had seen better decades. Zara lay curled beneath her favorite blanket, the purple one with stars that Naomi had bought at Target the week before the accident. 4 years hadn't dulled the edge of that particular knife, how small memories could cut deeper than big ones. The thermometer read 101.2, down from last night's 102, but still too high for comfort. Her forehead felt warm under his palm skin, carrying that fever flush that made her look younger than 7, more fragile than he wanted to admit. "Daddy." Her voice came out, scratchy, eyes opening to find him already there. "Hey, baby girl. How's the throat?" "Hurts." She coughed again, the sound rattling in her small chest. "But not as bad as yesterday." He helped her sit up, propped pillows behind her back, retrieved the medicine from the bathroom cabinet, where he'd organized everything by expiration date, because control over small things felt like control over something. The liquid acetaminophen went down with minimal complaint, chased by water from the cup with the bendy straw she insisted made everything taste better. His phone waited on the kitchen counter, next to bills he'd been avoiding. The banking app loaded with the speed of judgment, 847.23 is available. Rent due in 10 days, $1.450. Electric bill past due, 127. Groceries for the week, approximately 60 if he shopped carefully, and Zara didn't ask for anything extra. The math didn't work. Hadn't worked for months. The interview today needed to change that, or the math would solve itself in ways that kept him awake at night. Naomi's photograph, watched from the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like Texas. She smiled from a 4th of July barbecue 3 months before the drunk driver turned a Wednesday afternoon into the dividing line between before and after. The accident report had used words like instantaneous and no suffering, as if speed of death equaled mercy. Zara had been 3 old enough to remember mommy existed, young enough to forget the details Elijah would carry forever. "Daddy, are we going to lose our house?" Zara stood in the kitchen doorway, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, like a cape that had lost its power to protect. The question hit harder than it should have. 7-year-olds weren't supposed to worry about rent, weren't supposed to understand that houses could be lost, the same way jobs disappeared and savings evaporated, and fathers failed at keeping promises. "No, baby, Daddy's interview today will fix everything." The lie tasted like copper, like blood from a bitten tongue. He'd been telling versions of it for 7 months since Nexus Tech Solutions was acquired, and the new owners decided San Francisco made better business sense than Austin. They'd offered relocation packages, generous ones, but moving Zara away from her school, from Eleanor next door, from the only stability she'd known since losing her mother, felt like another kind of accident waiting to happen. Eleanor Whitmore arrived at 7:15 with the punctuality of someone whose teaching career had trained her to value every minute. 68 years old, silver hair pulled into a practical bun cardigan, despite the Texas heat already building outside. She'd lost her husband 2 years ago and found purpose in the apartment next door, in a little girl who needed grandmothering and a single father who needed grace. "Elijah, you look exhausted." Her assessment came with a hug that smelled like lavender and oatmeal cookies the grandmother Zara would never have otherwise. "Interview at Apex Dynamics, senior cloud architect position. Perfect fit for my background. They'll see your worth, I'm certain of it." The conviction in her voice made him want to believe, even though 15 previous interviews had taught him that certainty was a luxury he couldn't afford. Zara emerged from her room holding construction paper folded in half edges, decorated with marker drawings of stars and hearts, and a building that reached toward the top of the page. The card opened to reveal careful 7-year-old handwriting, "Good luck, Daddy," above a stick figure in a blue suit standing in front of a skyscraper. "You're going to get the job because you're the smartest daddy in the universe." The universe. Not the city, not Texas. The entire cosmos couldn't contain her faith in him, and he was about to put on a 12-year-old suit and drive to another company that would smile politely and send rejection via email 48 hours later. "I love it, baby. I'm going to keep it with me the whole time." Promise, promise. The Honda Accord had a 189,000 miles and a check engine light that had been on so long it felt like part of the dashboard. The air conditioning worked intermittently, cycling between Arctic and broken in ways the mechanic said would cost $800 to fix. Everything cost 800 or close enough to make his savings account a countdown to zero. The drive to downtown Austin took 40 minutes through morning traffic that moved with the confidence of people who had jobs waiting for them, places they belonged, paychecks that arrived with the reliability of sunrise. Elijah had been one of them once. 9 years at Nexus Tech Solutions, senior cloud architect with a focus on distributed systems and infrastructure security. Led a team of 12 engineers, saved the company $2.8 million through architecture redesign that reduced server costs while improving performance. None of it had been enough. Not for the 15 companies that had interviewed him since August and decided he wasn't worth the risk. Interview number 3 had been Datacorp in September, a tech firm in Round Rock that needed someone with his exact skill set. The conference room had held 3 people, a CTO who'd studied his resume with genuine interest, a project manager who'd asked intelligent questions about his architecture approach at Nexus Tech, and an HR representative who'd taken notes that seemed positive until the conversation turned personal. So these personal commitments keeping you in Austin? I'm a single father. My daughter is 7. I want stability for her. The CTO's interest had cooled like coffee left on a desk. The project manager's questions had become perfunctory. The HR representative had stopped taking notes altogether. 2 days later, the email arrived with language about pursuing other candidates whose situations better align with our current needs. Interview number 8 at Cloudbridge in November had followed the same script with different actors. Technical questions he'd answered perfectly, leadership scenarios he'd navigated with expertise gained from 9 years at Nexus Tech, then the pivot that always came. This role requires significant flexibility, late nights when systems go down, weekend deployments during major updates, on-call rotation every 3rd week. I have reliable childcare. Mrs. Whitmore, my neighbor, is retired. Zara is in after-school care until 6. I can manage. Manage isn't the same as guarantee. The interviewer had cut him off with the precision of someone who'd made this judgment before. We need someone with complete availability, someone whose personal situation allows for the kind of commitment this position demands. Interview 11 at Tech Vault 3 weeks ago had featured a female interviewer, a director of engineering, who'd mentioned her own children during small talk. He'd thought maybe possibly this time would be different. Mothers understood, didn't they? The impossible mathematics of work and parenting, the guilt that came with every choice, the way love for your child could be used as evidence of professional inadequacy. I admire single parents truly, but this role that is 60-hour weeks minimum during our growth phase. How do you manage that with a 7-year-old? I managed 55 hours at Nexus Tech while Zara was younger. My performance reviews. That was before you were doing it alone. Her tone had carried something that might have been sympathy or might have been the same judgment wearing a gentler mask. It's a different situation when you don't have a partner to share the load. The pattern had crystallized somewhere between interview number 12 and number 13. They didn't say the quiet part loud, didn't mention race or single fatherhood directly. The language stayed professional, culture fit, team dynamics, energy level, commitment, capacity. But the result was always the same. 15 interviews, 15 companies that had looked at his resume and seen excellence, then looked at his life and seen risk they weren't willing to take. Some nights driving home from rejections that tasted like all the others, he wondered if they saw double risk. Not just single father, but black single father. Not just family obligations, but the assumption that came with his skin color, the stereotypes that lived in hiring decisions even when no one spoke them aloud. He'd never know, for sure couldn't prove what lived in the space between "will be in touch" and emails that never came. The Apex Dynamics building rose 12 stories in downtown Austin, glass and steel, reflecting morning sun with the confidence of success. Their logo, a stylized triangle pointing skyward, marked the entrance where people in expensive suits moved with purpose. Elijah used to recognize in himself. Used to. Before unemployment became the job, he couldn't quit, no matter how hard he worked at interviews that led nowhere. The lobby smelled like money and ambition, leather furniture arranged in conversation clusters that suggested collaboration came easily here, that problems solved themselves when you hired the right people. A receptionist who looked fresh out of college smiled with professional warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes. Elijah Brennan, 9 o'clock interview. Have a seat, Mr. Brennan. Someone will be with you shortly. Shortly became 20 minutes, enough time to review his resume for the 16th time to find the same qualifications that should have mattered more than they apparently did. References that used words like exceptional and top 5% talent and would rehire immediately. None of it had been enough. Not at Data Corp or CloudBridge or Tech Vault or the 12 others that had looked at him and seen something they didn't want. Mr. Brennan, a woman in a charcoal suit approached her handshake firm and brief. I'm Victoria Ashford, CEO of Apex Dynamics. Please follow me. The conference room on the 8th floor held 3 people waiting like a tribunal. Victoria took her seat at the head of the table. Graham Sheffield, HR director, according to the nameplate, sat to her left with a legal pad already covered in notes from other candidates, other interviews, other judgments. Marcus Kane occupied the right side, the CTO, who would technically be Elijah's boss if this interview went better than the previous 15. Your resume is impressive. Victoria's opening carried the tone of someone who'd said the same words to many candidates and meant them each time. 9 years at Nexus Tech Senior Cloud Architect Team Leadership Experience. Walk us through your most significant technical achievement. The question invited him into territory where he could shine, where race and fatherhood didn't matter, because code didn't care who wrote it as long as it worked. 2019 Nexus Tech experienced a cascading database failure that affected 50,000 customers. Our entire engineering team had been working the problem for 6 hours with no resolution. The corruption was spreading through our backup systems, and our consultants were recommending a complete rebuild that would take 72 hours minimum. Marcus leaned forward, the body language of someone genuinely interested. What was your approach? I recognized the failure signature from a similar case study I'd encountered in graduate school, The issue wasn't in the primary database. It was corrupted validation protocols that were marking infected data as clean during backup restoration. Every recovery attempt spread the infection deeper. How long did the fix take? 45 minutes from diagnosis to full restoration. The key was bypassing automated recovery and manually isolating the corrupted validation files before forcing the system to regenerate them from a clean archive point. Victoria made a note, her expression suggesting approval. That kind of critical thinking under pressure is exactly what we need here. What about team leadership? How do you handle conflict between engineers with strong opinions? The questions continued, technical and managerial, covering system architecture and personnel management and strategic planning. Elijah answered each one drawing from 9 years of experience that should have made him unemployable, only in the sense that companies should have been competing to hire him. Should have been. In another universe where resumes mattered more than personal lives, where competence outweighed assumptions about commitment. He explained his approach to distributed systems, his philosophy on code review processes, his strategies for mentoring junior engineers. Described how he'd navigated budget constraints while maintaining system performance. Outlined his vision for infrastructure modernization that balanced innovation with stability. Every answer drew from real experience, real challenges solved, real teams led successfully. Victoria asked about cloud migration strategies. He walked through the Nexus Tech transition from on-premise to hybrid cloud, the cost savings achieved, the performance improvements measured. Graham asked about conflict resolution. He described mediating a dispute between 2 senior engineers whose architectural approaches had created team division, how he'd facilitated compromise that improved the final solution. Marcus tested his knowledge of current technologies, asking about containerization approaches, microservices, architecture, security protocols for distributed systems. Elijah answered with the confidence of someone who'd implemented these solutions in production environments, who understood theory because he'd lived the practice. For 30 minutes, the interview felt like all the others had in their technical phases. For the pivot, before the question that would transform professional assessment into personal judgment. 30 minutes in Victoria's questions shifted from what he could do to who he was outside the office. I noticed there's a 7-month gap in your employment history. Can you explain that? The trap opened beneath him, familiar as all the others. Nexus Tech was acquired by a company based in San Francisco. They offered relocation packages, but I chose not to move. Why not? Significant career opportunity. The truth sat in his throat like something too large to swallow. He could lie, could invent a story about aging parents or property investments or anything except the reality that had ended 15 previous interviews. But lies had a way of catching up, and he'd spent 9 years at Nexus Tech building a reputation for integrity that unemployment couldn't erase. I'm a single father. My daughter is 7 years old. She's settled in her school, has close friends, a support system here. I didn't want to uproot her life for a job, no matter how good the opportunity. The temperature in the conference room dropped degrees that weren't measurable, but were absolutely real. Victoria's pen stopped moving mid-sentence. Graham exchanged a glance with her that lasted less than a second, but communicated volumes. Marcus Kane's posture shifted backward, arms crossing in the universal language of closing off. I see. Victoria's tone remained professional, but something beneath it had changed. This role at Apex requires significant commitment, Elijah. We're in a high-growth phase. Weekend work during major deployments. Crisis response at any hour. Quarterly travel to our office in Denver. I understand. I have reliable childcare arranged. Mrs. Whitmore, my neighbor, is retired and has been helping me since my wife passed away 4 years ago. Zara is in an after-school program until 6. I can be flexible when the job requires it. Flexible within limits. Graham's statement landed somewhere between question and accusation. What happens if we have a system emergency at 2 in the morning? Can you guarantee availability within 30 minutes? Yes, I've handled night emergencies before at Nexus Tech. I keep my laptop ready and can be online immediately. What if it requires on-site presence? Marcus joined the questioning, his earlier interest replaced by the skepticism Elijah had learned to recognize. What if your daughter is sick and you're the only parent available? The only parent. As if that was a choice he'd made, as if Naomi had decided to die in a car accident and leave him navigating single parenthood while strangers judged his capacity to love his daughter and excel at his job simultaneously. I'll find a way. His voice carried edges now, frustration bleeding through professional composure. I always have. In 9 years at Nexus Tech, I never missed a critical deadline because of my daughter. My performance reviews will confirm that. Victoria closed her folder, the gesture somehow final. Elijah, we appreciate your honesty, but we need to be transparent with you as well. This position has failed twice in the past 18 months due to work-life balance issues. We can't afford another situation where personal obligations interfere with professional responsibilities. My daughter doesn't interfere with my professional responsibilities. The words came out harder than he intended, years of rejection compressed into a single sentence. If anything, she makes me more reliable. I have someone depending on me. That's not a weakness. That's motivation. That's a nice sentiment. Graham's tone suggested he thought otherwise. But sentiment doesn't fix systems at midnight or deploy patches during crunch time. The room tilted toward ending, all 3 interviewers wearing expressions Elijah had seen 15 times before. Professional regret that wasn't quite regret. Polite concern that wasn't quite concern. The careful distance people maintained when they'd already decided no and were just waiting for the conversation to reach its natural conclusion. He should have stood up and thanked them for their time. Should have walked out with dignity intact, saved himself the final humiliation. But something in him refused to make it easy, refused to let them hide behind polite language and coded concerns. Let me ask you something. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles tight. If I were married and my wife stayed home with Zara, would we be having this conversation about commitment? Victoria's discomfort showed in the slight shift of her shoulders, the way her gaze moved to the wall just past his left ear. This isn't about, or if I were a white man who mentioned children in passing, would you be questioning whether I can handle the job? The silence that followed felt like confirmation of every suspicion he'd carried through 16 interviews. Graham cleared his throat but said nothing. Marcus examined his notepad as if it contained answers to questions no one was asking. Victoria maintained her CEO composure, but her fingers drummed once against the table, betraying something underneath. Mr. Brennan, Graham's voice carried the firmness of someone redirecting a conversation that had gone off script. I think we should save it. Elijah stood his chair, rolling backward with more force than necessary. I know how this ends. 16 interviews, same questions, same doubts, same rejection, wrapped in language about culture, fit, and commitment levels and whatever else lets you sleep at night, while qualified candidates get dismissed for having families. He gathered his folder, the one containing references and performance reviews and proof of excellence that apparently didn't matter when weighed against the liability of loving his daughter. We'll be in touch. Victoria's words followed him to the door, automatic as a recorded message. Elijah didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the lie they both knew she was telling. The hallway stretched ahead, fluorescent lights reflecting off polished floors that had seen hundreds of candidates walk this same path. How many of them had been told no for reasons that had nothing to do with their ability to do the job? The elevator descended through floors of people working jobs they'd been deemed suitable for people whose personal lives apparently aligned better with corporate needs. His reflection in the polished metal doors showed a man in a 12-year-old suit carrying a folder full of credentials that hadn't been enough 16 times running. 1048. The interview had lasted 92 minutes, which meant he'd failed more slowly than usual. Small victories in a war he was losing. The parking garage smelled like exhaust and defeat, concrete pillars casting shadows across his Accord parked in visitor section C. The engine started with its familiar rattle check engine light, glowing its perpetual warning. Zara's card sat on the passenger seat where he'd placed it for luck that apparently didn't exist. You're going to get the job because you're the smartest daddy in the universe. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. His phone buzzed as he put the car in reverse. Text from Eleanor. Zara's fever is down to 99.8. She says to tell you she loves you and knows you're going to be amazing. Another buzz. Email notification. The preview showed enough. Thank you for your interest in the position at Tech Vault. After careful consideration, 17 rejections. He didn't need to open the email to know the rest didn't need to read polite language about pursuing other candidates whose qualifications better match their needs. Interview number 14 from last week had finally gotten around to saying no, as if waiting somehow softened the blow. The parking garage exit required a ticket he didn't have because visitor parking was free for the first 2 hours, and he'd only wasted 92 minutes of Apex Dynamics' precious time. The barrier lifted automatically, releasing him into downtown Austin traffic that moved with the certainty of people who had places to be and jobs that wanted them there. He should have driven home. Should have picked up Zara early from Eleanor's care, taken her for ice cream she'd want even with a fever, pretended this interview had gone differently. Should have started planning for interview number 18, number 19, to number 20, however many it took until either someone said yes or his savings hit zero and the planning became moot. Instead, he sat in the parking lot with the engine running, air conditioning, fighting the heat that pressed against the windshield. The Apex building rose ahead of him, 12 stories of glass, reflecting clouds that moved across the sky with the freedom of things not bound by gravity or rejections or the need to explain themselves to anyone. 11:05. Movement inside the lobby caught his attention. People were running, not the purposeful stride of professionals moving between meetings, but actual running. Clusters formed around computer screens. Someone in an expensive suit, older than the others, burst from the elevator and started gesturing with the kind of animation that suggested problems too big for calm discussion. More movement. A white van pulled into the circular drive near the entrance logo on the side, reading, Tech Rescue Emergency Services. Two people in matching polo shirts jumped out carrying equipment cases that looked expensive and urgent. 11:08. Another van. DataCore Solutions, in blue letters across white paint. Three more people with more equipment moving with the hurried purpose of specialists called to an emergency. 11:11, a third van, then a fourth. The lobby through those glass walls had transformed into controlled chaos screens everywhere, people pointing at monitors and talking rapidly into phones and typing with the frantic energy of those fighting a problem that was winning. Elijah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. 9 years at Nexus Tech had taught him to recognize crisis signatures even from a distance. The pattern of movement, the clustering around terminals, the repeated restarting of systems visible in the way people stepped back and forward from screens. This wasn't a minor issue. This was infrastructure failure, the kind that brought in multiple consulting teams because internal IT had already tried everything they knew and failed. His phone buzzed again. Eleanor. Zara drew you another picture. She wanted me to send it now for extra good luck, even though the interview was over. The attached image showed crayon figures, a tall one in a suit and a small one with yellow ribbons holding hands. Above them in Zara's careful printing, Daddy saves the day. Through the glass walls, the man in the expensive suit threw his phone. The device arced across the lobby and shattered against a marble pillar, pieces scattering across polished floor in a spray of glass and plastic and frustration that silenced every person nearby for exactly 3 seconds before the chaos resumed. Elijah recognized desperation. He'd been living it for 7 months. The technical part of his brain, the part that had diagnosed Nexus Tech's cascade failure in 2018, was already analyzing what he could see. Database corruption, almost certainly. The way people were checking multiple systems suggested the problem had spread beyond primary servers. The number of consulting teams indicated the internal team had been working this for hours with no resolution. The phone-throwing executive looked like a CEO or someone high enough in the hierarchy that this crisis threatened more than just uptime statistics. His hand reached for the door handle before his conscious mind approved the decision. They just rejected him, told him he wasn't suitable because he had a daughter who needed him, questioned his commitment, his availability, his capacity to put the job first when the job demanded it. He should drive away, let them solve their own problems with their $50 an hour consultants who apparently had the right kind of personal lives, the kind that didn't include 7-year-olds with fevers, and neighbors who helped because family couldn't. But Zara's voice lived in his head the way she'd said it this morning with absolute certainty. "You're the smartest daddy in the universe." Or what would he tell her tonight when she asked about the interview? How would he explain walking away from people who needed help he could provide? What kind of example did that set for a little girl who believed her father saved the day? Because saving the day was what daddies did. The car door opened, heat pressed against him like a physical wall. Texas sun turning the parking lot into an oven. The Apex building waited ahead, glass walls revealing crisis that was almost certainly the exact scenario he'd warned Victoria about during the interview. Corrupted validation protocols. He'd mentioned it specifically when she'd asked about his approach to system architecture, had explained how backup restoration could spread infection if validation wasn't properly isolated. She'd made a note. Graham had nodded, Marcus had looked interested, and then they'd asked about his daughter and decided he wasn't worth the risk. Elijah locked the car Zara's cards in his pocket like talismans that had stopped working, but couldn't be abandoned. The walk across the parking lot felt longer than 92 minutes of interview, each step a choice to help people who'd chosen not to hire him. The lobby doors reflected his approach, a black man in a 12-year-old suit walking toward a crisis that wasn't his responsibility, and a company that had made it clear they didn't want what he had to offer. Except they did want it. They just hadn't known it yet. What he didn't know, what he couldn't see from the parking lot, Victoria Ashford stood in the server room 3 floors down, watching their entire customer database fail in real time, while 53 consultants tried solutions that made the problem worse. Didn't know that Graham Sheffield had just pulled up Elijah's resume and noticed the line about cascade failure resolution at Nexus Tech. Didn't know that the crisis-destroying Apex dynamics that afternoon was precisely the same pattern Elijah had diagnosed and fixed in 45 minutes 4 years ago. Didn't know that the next hour would change everything. But he was about to find out. The security guard's nameplate read James Rutherford, 46. If the graying temples were honest, built like someone who'd played football in high school and kept enough of it to matter. His hand moved toward the taser on his belt, not threatening yet, but the warning was clear. "Sir, the building is in lockdown. Only authorized personnel and approved consultants past this point." Elijah kept his hands visible, his posture unthreatening in ways he'd learned long before interviews taught him the same lessons about making white people comfortable. "I interviewed here this morning, senior cloud architect position. I think I can help with your technical problem." James glanced past him toward the parking lot as if checking whether this was some kind of elaborate scam. "We have over 50 consultants already working the issue. I'm sure they have it under control." The crash of someone's laptop hitting the floor echoed from inside, followed by cursing that suggested control was the last thing anyone had. Elijah gestured toward the chaos visible through glass walls. "Does that look under control to you?" Hesitation flickered across James's face, the kind that came from watching professionals fail at problems for hours while being paid rates that could feed a family for months. His radio crackled with static and a voice requesting backup on the 3rd floor, something about a consultant threatening to walk out if they didn't get full system access immediately. "Look, Mr. Brennan, Elijah Brennan, I'm not asking for system access. Just let me talk to someone in charge. 5 minutes. If they're not interested, I'll leave quietly." Before James could respond, the elevator doors opened, and a young man in wrinkled business casual practically ran into the lobby. Late 20s white with the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting losing battles against technology that refused to cooperate. His eyes locked on Elijah with recognition that seemed impossible. "You're Elijah Brennan," from the 9 o'clock interview. The statement landed somewhere between question and accusation. Elijah nodded slowly, trying to place this person who apparently knew him despite never being in the conference room. "I'm Tyler Whitlock, junior systems engineer. I was supposed to be in your interview but got pulled into this crisis at 8:30. His words tumbled out rapid fire, the cadence of someone who'd been running on caffeine and adrenaline for too long. "You mentioned cascade failures in your application materials. You said you'd seen this exact pattern before. At Nexus Tech, 2019. Database corruption spreading through backup validation protocols." Tyler's face transformed, hope replacing exhaustion in a way that was almost painful to witness. He turned to James with authority that seemed to surprise both of them. "Peterson, let me get Ms. Ashford. This might be our way out." Ms. Chen already authorized him to leave the premises. "Graham isn't the CEO." Tyler was already moving back toward the elevators. "Give me 3 minutes." The 3 minutes stretched into 5, then 7. Elijah stood in the lobby watching consultants swarm between floors, recognizing the signatures of failure in their body language. The older ones carried resignation, having seen enough disasters to know when the solution wasn't coming easily. The younger ones moved with frantic energy that would burn out by nightfall, trying the same fixes with minor variations and expecting different results. Through one of the conference room windows, he could see whiteboards covered in network diagrams and error codes. Someone had written corrupted validation files in red marker with 3 question marks like prayers that might get answered if the punctuation was emphatic enough. They were close to the answer, closer than they probably realized, but close didn't fix databases or restore customer records or save companies from failures that made headlines. His phone buzzed. Eleanor, Zara's asking if you got the job yet. What should I tell her? The question sat in his chest like a stone. He could tell her the truth that 17 companies had looked at him and decided he wasn't worth the risk. Could explain that being a good father apparently made him a bad employment prospect, that loving his daughter too visibly marked him as unreliable in ways that 9 years of excellence couldn't overcome. Could prepare her for the conversation they'd need to have soon about losing the apartment, moving somewhere cheaper, maybe leaving Austin entirely to find work in cities where his resume mattered more than his family situation. Or he could tell her to wait. Just wait. Because something was happening here that felt like the universe offering one more chance, and he'd learned from Naomi that chances didn't come with guarantees or instructions or any promise beyond the opportunity to trip him. Tell her daddy is helping some people who need him. I'll be home soon. The elevator doors opened again. Victoria Ashford emerged first, her CEO composure cracked around the edges in ways that expensive suits couldn't hide. Exhaustion showed in the slight drag of her steps, the way her hand gripped her phone like a lifeline that had stopped working. Graham Sheffield followed 3 steps behind his earlier confidence, replaced by something that looked like barely controlled panic. Victoria's eyes found him across the lobby. Recognition passed through her face, the interview candidate from this morning, the one they'd rejected for having a daughter, standing in their lobby during a crisis that was currently destroying everything she'd built. Mr. Brennan? Her voice carried less authority than it had 4 hours ago. What are you doing here? I saw your crisis from the parking lot. Came back to help. Graham moved forward, his HR training reasserting itself even in chaos. Ms. Ashford, we asked this gentleman to leave the premises after his interview concluded. There are liability issues. Victoria silenced him with a gesture, her attention locked on Elijah with an intensity that felt like assessment in desperation competing for dominance. Tyler says you've dealt with cascade failures before. Nexus Tech 2019, 50,000 customers affected. Our entire engineering team worked the problem for 6 hours before I diagnosed the source. And you mentioned this in your interview this morning. The statement hung between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to acknowledge directly. Yes, he'd mentioned it. Specifically, when she'd asked about his approach to system architecture, he'd explained how backup restoration could become a vector for spreading corruption if validation protocols weren't properly isolated. She'd made notes. They'd all nodded. Then they'd asked about his daughter and decided his technical expertise wasn't worth the complication of his personal life. I did. You asked about my biggest achievement. I told you about the validation protocol fix. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Recognition settling into the kind of regret that came too late to matter. And we rejected you 2 hours later. 90 minutes. But who's counting? The lobby had gone quiet around them, consultants and employees watching this exchange with the interest of people who sensed the narrative shifting in ways they didn't fully understand. Marcus Kane emerged from a stairwell, his CTO title, insufficient armor against problems he couldn't solve. He stopped when he saw Elijah's confusion replacing the skepticism that had filled the interview. Brennan, what's he doing here? Victoria turned to face her CTO, and something in her posture suggested she was done taking advice from people who'd gotten them into this mess. Mr. Kane, how many hours have our consultants been working this problem? Since 7 this morning, almost 5 hours now. And how much closer are we to resolution? Marcus's jaw tightened. We're making progress. The issue is complex. We're hemorrhaging customer data. Our investor presentation is in 90 minutes. If we can't demonstrate system stability, we lose $50 million in funding and probably the company. Her words came out flat, exhaustion, stripping away corporate speak. So, I'll ask again, how much closer are we to fixing this? The silence that followed was answer enough. Victoria turned back to Elijah. You have 45 minutes. If you cause additional damage to our systems, I will have you arrested and sued for every dollar of loss we incur. If you fix this, She paused, the next words clearly costing something. If you fix this, we'll discuss what comes next. I'm not doing this for a job. The truth came out before calculation could soften it. I'm doing it because people are suffering, and I can help. Tyler practically vibrated with nervous energy. I'll get him set up at a diagnostic terminal. Full access. Supervised at every step. Victoria's CEO voice reasserted itself. Mr. Kane, you monitor personally. Any sign this is making things worse, you shut him down immediately. The server room, 3 floors down, smelled like ozone and desperation. Climate control, fighting a losing battle against equipment, running at temperatures that would cause failures on top of failures if they didn't get this resolved soon. Screens everywhere showed the same story. Critical systems offline backup restoration, failing error messages, cascading through logs faster than anyone could read them. Dr. Raymond Fisher stood near the primary terminal, 61 years old, according to the consultant badge hanging from his neck. Expensive suit, suggesting he charged rates that matched his apparent seniority. His expression when Tyler brought Elijah in mixed skepticism was something that looked like territorial defensiveness. Victoria's bringing in walk-ins now. We have a methodology here. Your methodology has been failing for 5 hours. Tyler's voice carried an edge Elijah suspected was new stress peeling away whatever deference junior engineers normally showed senior consultants. This is Elijah Brennan. He's solved this exact problem before. At a company no one's heard of. Fisher dismissed the claim with a gesture toward his team of 6 consultants clustered around various terminals. We're executing comprehensive diagnostics across all primary and secondary systems. The issue is complex, requiring sophisticated analysis. Elijah moved to the diagnostic station Tyler had cleared for him, his hands already reaching for the keyboard before conscious thought approved. 9 years at Nexus Tech had built muscle memory for crisis response, the kind that bypassed doubt and politics and went straight to pattern recognition. Tyler, pull up your system architecture map from the past 48 hours. The screen filled with network diagrams showing data flow between servers, backup systems, validation protocols. Elijah's eyes tracked pathways, looking for the signature he'd seen, before the specific pattern that announced corruption spreading through verification rather than origin. Now show me backup validation logs starting at midnight yesterday. Tyler's fingers flew across his own keyboard, summoning logs that scrolled past too quickly for normal reading. But Elijah wasn't reading normally. He was scanning for anomalies, for timestamps that didn't match expected patterns, for completion codes that suggested process interruption masked as success. There, 3:47 a.m. Validation check initiated, completion logged at 3:47 and 42 seconds. The entire process had taken 42 seconds when it should have required at least 12 minutes for a database this size. That's incomplete. His finger touched the screen marking the entry. Your validation protocol tried to run its scheduled integrity check, hit an error, and logged itself as complete to avoid triggering cascade warnings. But the validation files themselves weren't properly updated. Marcus Kane had moved closer, his skepticism at war with professional interest. You're basing that conclusion on one log entry. Tyler, show me when the primary database first showed corruption indicators. More typing, more logs. 7:18 this morning. Elijah did the math in his head, the kind that came automatically after years of debugging systems where minutes mattered. 3.5 hours after the failed validation. The corruption existed before 7 a.m. Your monitoring didn't catch it because your validation system said everything was clean. Fisher stepped forward, his consultant authority threatened by someone outside his team reaching conclusions his people hadn't. This is speculation. We need comprehensive analysis before. Show me all backup restoration attempts since 8 a.m. Tyler hesitated, glancing at Marcus for approval. The CTO nodded once, his expression unreadable. The logs appeared, 9 restoration attempts between 8:15 and 11:30. All failed, all with identical error codes. It all spreading corruption deeper into the backup architecture, exactly the way Elijah had warned Victoria about in the interview she'd conducted 4 hours before rejecting him. You're using corrupted validation files to verify your backups. He turned to face Fisher directly, keeping his voice level despite the vindication burning in his chest. Every restoration attempt treats infected data as clean because your validation protocols say it's clean. The system trusts its own verification, so each fix makes the problem worse. Fisher's face reddened. That's a theory. You can't possibly know. I know because I've seen this exact signature before. At Nexus Tech 2019, we lost 6 hours trying complex solutions before I realized the validation system itself was compromised. He turned back to the screen, fingers already moving through directory structures. Tyler, I need access to your core validation files. Read only for now. Tyler looked at Marcus again. The CTO's jaw worked, pride wrestling with desperation. Grant him access, but I'm watching every command. The directory structure appeared layers of folders containing the protocols that governed how Apex's systems verified data integrity. Elijah navigated deeper, following pathways that led to the heart of their backup architecture. Systems Security 101 taught that validation protocols lived in isolated directories protected from the corruption they were designed to detect. But isolation was only as good as the implementation, and somewhere in this structure was the breach that had let infection spread to the watchers themselves. Third sublevel nested inside backup management utilities. 3 files each showing modified timestamps that predated the corruption by weeks. But the file sizes were wrong, subtly wrong in ways that suggested alteration disguised as normal data. There, his cursor hovered over the first file. Your validation protocols. They're corrupted and marked as clean by the very system they're supposed to verify. Marcus leaned in, squinting at the screen. The system says those files are healthy. The system is lying to itself. That's the whole problem. Elijah's voice carried the patience of someone who'd explained this before, who understood that technical truth fought uphill battles against institutional inertia. When validation is compromised, everything downstream becomes suspect. Your consultants are treating symptoms while the disease spreads unchecked. Fisher moved to another terminal, calling up his own analysis. Even if you're correct, deleting core validation files would crash the entire backup system. We'd lose fail-safe protection. You've already lost it. The protection is giving you false confidence while corruption spreads. Elijah stood facing the consultants and Tyler and Marcus with the calm that came from knowing exactly what needed to happen next. I need to bypass your automated recovery protocols and run manual restoration. The system will be completely offline for 3 to 4 minutes. No monitoring, no automated processes, no safety nets. The room temperature seemed to drop. Marcus shook his head slowly. Absolutely not. Full shutdown means every customer-facing service goes dark. If something goes wrong, then you've lost 4 minutes of consultant time trying solutions that haven't worked for 5 hours. Elijah kept his voice measured, professional, the tone he'd perfected during 9 years of convincing skeptical executives to trust technical judgment over institutional fear. But if I'm right, you're operational in 6 minutes. Full data restoration, customer records intact. And if you're wrong, Graham Sheffield had appeared in the doorway, his HR director present, somehow making the technical crisis feel like a personnel problem. If this crashes everything permanently, the question deserved honesty. Then I'm wrong and you're no worse off than bankruptcy was going to make you anyway. Victoria's voice cut through from behind Graham, her CEO authority reasserting itself in the kind of decision that separated leaders from managers. Do it. Marcus turned to face her. Victoria, as CTO, this is my call. And as CEO who's about to lose $50 million in funding and everything we've built, it's mine. She moved into the server room, exhaustion and determination written in equal measure across her face. Mr. Brennan, proceed. The cursor blinked on Elijah's screen, waiting for commands that would either save or destroy a company that had rejected him that morning. His hands hovered over the keyboard, muscle memory ready to execute procedures he'd performed once before under similar pressure. But this time the stakes included his own credibility, his own judgment, his own decision to walk back into a building that had decided he wasn't worth their time. Zara's card pressed against his chest through his shirt pocket, construction paper carrying her absolute faith that he was the smartest daddy in the universe. That faith deserved protection, deserved a father who didn't walk away from people in crisis just because they'd walked away from him first. His finger started moving. First command, terminate all automated backup processes. The system threw warnings, red text scrolling across black background, announcing that critical fail-safes were being disabled. Every consultant in the room stiffened. Fisher actually reached toward Elijah's shoulder as if to physically stop him, but Marcus raised a hand, holding everyone in suspended animation, while a man they'd rejected that morning took control of their entire infrastructure. Second command, isolate corrupted validation directories. More warnings, these even more urgent, the system recognizing that its own verification protocols were being quarantined like hostile code. Tyler made a small sound that might have been fear or hope, impossible to distinguish. Third command, force full system shutdown. The screens went black. All of them. Simultaneously. Every monitor in the server room displaying nothing but darkness that felt like void, like the absence of everything they'd been fighting to save. Somewhere above them, in offices and conference rooms and customer service centers, every computer terminal would be showing the same emptiness. The entire company offline. Dark. Dead. Jesus Christ. Graham's whisper carried through the silence like a prayer that had lost faith in answers. Elijah's screen showed a single cursor blinking in the upper left corner, the only light in a room full of dead systems. His fingers continued typing commands into darkness, executing procedures from memory, because there was no help documentation for moments like this, no manual for fixing what you couldn't see. Fourth command: delete corrupted validation files from quarantine. The system didn't respond with warnings this time. It didn't respond at all. The deletion happened in silence, critical files disappearing into whatever void held, erased data taking with them. The infection that had spread through Apex's infrastructure, like disease through an immune system that couldn't recognize its own compromise. Fifth command: force regeneration from archived validation protocols. The cursor blinked. Blinked again. Nothing changed. The screens stayed black. The room stayed silent except for climate control fighting to maintain temperatures against equipment that was no longer generating heat because it was no longer functioning. Tyler's voice barely rose above whisper. Did it work? Give it time. Elijah's own pulse hammered in his ears, certainty from experience at war with the reality that every system was different. Every implementation had quirks that could turn theory into spectacular failure. The regeneration process needs to verify archive integrity before committing. That takes 60 to 90 seconds. The seconds crawled past like hours compressed. Fisher had moved to his own terminal, fingers poised over a keyboard that controlled nothing, monitoring systems that showed only darkness. Marcus stood statue still, his CTO identity wrapped up in systems he couldn't protect from either the problem or the solution. Graham had pulled out his phone, probably calculating how fast he could draft termination paperwork if this went wrong. Victoria remained silent near the door, her face unreadable. She'd made the call, trusted a man she'd rejected hours earlier, put her company's survival in the hands of someone she'd deemed unsuitable for employment because he had a 7-year-old daughter who needed him. 70 seconds. The cursor blinked, unchanged. Equipment stayed dark. The void held. 80 seconds. Still nothing. Tyler's breathing had gone shallow, the kind that came before panic or a breakthrough, impossible to predict which. 90 seconds. Elijah's screen flickered. Once. So briefly it might have been imagination or wishful thinking, or the first sign of catastrophic failure spreading through hardware that couldn't recover from commands issued by someone who'd overestimated his expertise. Then light. A progress bar materialized, green against black, showing percentages that climbed with the speed of continental drift. 0%. John, 11. It's regenerating. Tyler's voice cracked on the words. The validation protocols are rebuilding from archive. The bar climbed. 17%. 23. 31. Around the room, other screens began flickering to life, systems waking from forced shutdown in stages that suggested cascade recovery rather than cascade failure. 45%. 52. Fisher had moved to stand beside Elijah's terminal, his consultant skepticism replaced by something that looked like professional respect fighting against territorial resentment. 68%. The bar slowed, stalled, held position for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. Tyler made that sound again, the one between fear and hope that had no name in any language. Did it freeze? Graham's question carried the weight of his company's survival compressed into 3 syllables. No. Elijah kept his voice steady, his eyes locked on the screen. It's verifying integrity of the regenerated protocols, making sure the archive wasn't also compromised. This is normal. Normal for values of normal that included betting everything on a process most people would never witness, trusting that code written by engineers he'd never met would perform exactly as designed under conditions they'd probably never tested. 72%. Movement resumed, the bar advancing with renewed confidence. 78, 84. 91, 97%. The other screens around the room had fully illuminated now, showing system status checks and restoration progress bars and error logs scrolling past as the infrastructure diagnosed itself, found its wounds, and began healing. 100%. The progress bar disappeared. Text replaced it, rapid-fire announcements of services coming online, databases mounting validation protocols, initializing with clean integrity checks that showed no corruption, no infection, no trace of the disease that had threatened to destroy everything. Tyler let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Customer databases back. Transaction history restored. All integrity checks passing green. Fisher ran his own diagnostic from his terminal, his fingers moving with the automatic precision of someone who needed to verify rather than trust. Data consistency at 100%. No corruption detected in any sector. He looked up, and something in his expression suggested the words cost him professionally. It worked. You actually fixed it. The server room erupted. Consultants who'd been fighting this problem for 5 hours started talking at once, voices overlapping with relief and professional analysis, and the particular joy that came from watching impossible problems become solved through approaches they hadn't considered. Tyler actually hugged his keyboard forehead pressed against plastic like prayer answered by code. Victoria remained motionless near the door, her face cycling through emotions too fast to track. Relief certainly, gratitude probably. But underneath those something that looked like recognition of cost of judgment, rendered too quickly on a morning that felt like it had happened years ago instead of hours. Marcus extended his hand, the gesture formal and somehow final. That was exceptional work, Mr. Brennan. Elijah stood from the terminal, legs unsteady from adrenaline crash, and shook the offered hand. Just pattern recognition. I've seen this before. You mentioned that in your interview. Victoria's voice carried weight beyond the words. Specifically, when I asked about your approach to system architecture, you warned us about this exact scenario. The room had gone quiet again. The celebration paused as people sensed a different kind of tension taking hold. Elijah met her gaze, directly finding the courage that came from having nothing left to lose, and a daughter who believed in him waiting at home. I did warn you, and 90 minutes later, you rejected me for having a daughter. The statement landed like a stone in still water ripples, spreading through consultants and employees who suddenly understood they were witnessing something beyond technical crisis resolution. Graham started to speak, fell silent. Fisher found something fascinating about his own shoes. Tyler looked between Elijah and Victoria with the expression of someone watching a conversation that would define more than just this moment. We were wrong. Victoria's acknowledgement came without deflection or excuse, her CEO composure giving way to something more human. I was wrong. We made a hiring decision based on assumptions instead of evidence. Based on the assumption that being a single black father meant I couldn't handle the job. He kept his voice level, stripping away the anger that wanted to rise, leaving only truth that hurt more cleanly than rage. You saw my family's situation and decided it made me unreliable, uncommitted, risky, despite 9 years of evidence proving otherwise. Graham moved forward, his HR training reasserting itself too late. Mr. Brennan, we made an employment decision based on various factors. Graham, Victoria silenced him without looking away from Elijah. Stop. He's right. We rejected one of the best candidates we'd ever seen because he has a 7-year-old daughter and no wife to make that acceptable to our outdated thinking. The admission hung in the air, witnessed by too many people for corporate amnesia to erase it later. Elijah felt something in his chest loosen slightly. Vindication, mixing with exhaustion, mixing with the awareness that being right didn't pay rent or put food on tables or give Zara the stability she deserved. I should go. He moved toward the door, past Victoria, past the consultants who'd watched him solve in 45 minutes what they couldn't fix in 5 hours. My daughter's waiting to hear how my day went. Wait. Victoria's hand almost touched his arm, stopped just short. Please, we need to talk about what happens next. What happens next is I pick up my daughter from my neighbor who's been watching her for free while I interview at companies that keep deciding I'm not good enough. The words came out harder than intended, months of rejection compressed into a single sentence. 17 rejections. This morning makes 18 if you're keeping count. I don't want it to be 18. Her voice carried something beyond professional interest, something that sounded like genuine regret. Mr. Brennan, Elijah, you just saved my company. Name your salary. The offer should have felt like victory. Should have erased the morning's humiliation, the months of searching, the nights lying awake doing math that never worked, no matter how many times he recalculated. But standing in a server room surrounded by people who'd watched him prove his worth only after their other options failed, felt less like winning and more like being the last choice who happened to be the right one. I didn't come back for a job. The truth felt important, necessary in ways he couldn't fully articulate. I came back because my daughter drew me a card that said I saved the day. How could I see people suffering and not help? That's exactly why I want you here. Victoria's voice carried the authority that had built Apex Dynamics from startup to 12 floors of downtown real estate. 180,000 base salary, senior cloud architect position, the one we should have offered you this morning. The number hung between them, more money than he'd made at Nexus Tech, enough to pay rent for more than a year, to give Zara health insurance and stability and all the things unemployment had taken away. Enough to make the past 7 months feel like bad dream ending rather than reality continuing. But something in the offer felt wrong, like accepting a prize for finishing a race everyone else had started hours before he'd been allowed on the track. The same position you rejected me for 4 hours ago. He kept his voice even professional, the tone that had served him through 16 interviews that ended in polite dismissals. Because 90 minutes after I warned you about this exact problem, you decided my daughter made me unsuitable. Victoria flinched, actually flinched, her CEO composure cracking enough to show the person underneath. Yes, and I'm trying to correct that mistake now. Correct the mistake of rejecting me, or correct the mistake of rejecting me before you needed me to fix your crisis. The question wasn't entirely fair, but fairness felt like a luxury he'd stopped being able to afford somewhere around interview number 12. The server room had emptied while they talked consultants and employees, finding reasons to be elsewhere, while their CEO negotiated with a man who'd exposed her judgment as flawed at best, discriminatory at worst. Only Tyler remained hovering near his terminal, like a witness who understood his presence mattered even if his contribution didn't. Both. Victoria's answer came after a pause that suggested she'd considered lying and chosen truth instead. I need you here because you're brilliant, but I also need you here because having you walk away after proving us wrong would mean I learned nothing from this morning. Elijah looked at her, really looked, seeing past the CEO title to the person who'd made a bad decision and was trying to unmake it without the benefit of time travel. He thought about Zara waiting at home, about Eleanor, who'd been helping for months without asking for anything in return, about the $847 that wouldn't last 2 more weeks, let alone until another job materialized, from companies who kept seeing his resume and family situation as incompatible. But he also thought about the next single parent who'd interview at Apex, about whether accepting this offer would change anything beyond his own circumstances, about whether being the exception proved the rule or challenged it. Before I answer, I need to know something. His hands found his pockets, fingers touching construction paper that had survived a morning of rejection and an afternoon of redemption. The next single parent who interviews here, the next Black father or mother trying to work and raise kids simultaneously, will you reject them too? Victoria's pause stretched long enough to matter. No, absolutely not. Prove it. Change your hiring policies. In writing, make it official that family obligations don't disqualify candidates from consideration. Graham had reappeared in the doorway, his face suggesting this conversation was veering into territory where HR directors spent careers trying to avoid. Mr. Brennan Company policy development requires months of review, legal consultation, board approval. Then I declined the offer. Elijah moved toward the door, past Graham, past Tyler, past the terminal that still showed green status lights, announcing systems saved by someone deemed unsuitable for employment. Because this isn't just about me, it's about the next parent, and the one after that, and all the people your policies assume can't do the job because they love their children too visibly. Wait, Victoria's voice carried command, but underneath it lived something that sounded like desperation. What if I commit to policy review starting immediately? Full assessment of our hiring practices, implementation of family-friendly policies, written protection against discrimination based on parental status. How immediately? I'll call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. She pulled out her phone, fingers already moving across the screen. We'll draft initial policy changes by end of week. Full implementation within 90 days. Elijah studied her face, looking for corporate performance versus genuine commitment. 9 years at Nexus Tech had taught him to recognize when executives made promises they intended to keep versus promises designed to end difficult conversations. Victoria met his gaze without flinching, her exhaustion giving way to something that looked like determination, finding new purpose. And you'll hire qualified single parents who apply during that 90-day window. Yes. Not just interview them, actually hire them if they're qualified. Yes. Her voice had steadied CEO authority returning as she made commitments that would bind Apex to standards they'd failed that morning. I'll personally review every applicant with family obligations to ensure they receive fair consideration. The offer hung between them, better than it had been minutes ago, still insufficient to fix systemic problems that had rejected him 16 times before Apex became 17, but sufficient, perhaps, to start changing something beyond his own bank account balance. Then I accept. The words felt heavier than they should have, weighted with awareness that accepting made him complicit in a system that had tried to exclude him until it needed him badly enough to reconsider. 180,000, senior cloud architect, with the understanding that I leave at 5:30 every day to pick up my daughter. No exceptions. Victoria extended her hand, the handshake sealing agreements that went beyond employment contracts. Done. The elevator ride to the lobby felt different than the descent had that morning. Rejection transformed into something that wasn't quite victory, but was undeniably better than the alternative. Tyler had followed him, bouncing on his heels with energy that suggested the crisis had given him second wind rather than exhaustion. That was incredible. The way you diagnosed the problem, the manual restoration procedure, I've never seen anyone work that fast. Elijah smiled despite everything. 9 years of practice and one very similar crisis. I got lucky. It wasn't luck. Tyler's voice carried the certainty of someone young enough to still believe competence always won. You knew exactly what you were doing. Ms. Ashford was right to hire you. The lobby had returned to something approximating normal consultants packing equipment with the satisfied efficiency of people whose work was done, employees returning to desks where computers showed data instead of error messages. Through the glass walls, the parking lot held his accord, still waiting where he'd left it, a tired car containing a daughter's drawings and faith that her father would somehow eventually find a way through. But before he could reach the exit, the elevator across the lobby opened, and three people emerged, their suits suggesting wealth and their bearing suggesting power. Victoria straightened immediately, her exhaustion masked by professional greeting that transformed her into the CEO who'd built Apex from nothing into something worth $50 million of investor attention. The lead figure was black 60s, silver hair, an expensive watch, and the kind of presence that announced success without needing introduction. The two behind him, a white woman in her 40s and a white man slightly younger, carried themselves with the deference of people who knew their opinions mattered, but didn't override the person they followed. Mr. Caldwell. Victoria moved forward, hand extended, voice carrying warmth that suggested these weren't just investors, but specifically investors she needed to impress. Thank you for your patience during our technical difficulties this afternoon. Robert Caldwell's handshake was brief, his attention already moving past Victoria to scan the lobby with eyes that had probably evaluated hundreds of companies and found most of them wanting. Victoria, we heard your systems were down for 5 hours, that your customer database was completely offline. We experienced a significant technical challenge this morning, but I'm pleased to report we achieved full restoration with zero data loss. How? The question came from the woman, her voice carrying skepticism that suggested she'd heard corporate spin before and didn't trust easy victories. We were told you had multiple consulting firms working the problem with no resolution. Victoria turned her gesture, including Elijah, who'd been moving toward the exit. We found the right person for the job. Robert Caldwell, Amanda Cross, Christopher Wade. I'd like you to meet Elijah Brennan, the engineer who saved our company this afternoon. 3 pairs of eyes focused on him with an intensity that felt like assessment and calculation happening simultaneously. Elijah fought the urge to straighten his 12-year-old suit to somehow look more impressive than a man who'd been unemployed that morning and was standing in a lobby he'd almost left forever. Mr. Brennan, Robert's voice carried Texas underneath polish, the kind of accent that survives success. Walk us through what you did. The request wasn't quite command, but wasn't quite question either, falling somewhere between that suggested refusing wasn't really an option. Elijah glanced at Victoria, who nodded encouragement that felt more like instruction, then turned back to face 3 investors who apparently held Apex's future in whatever decision they were here to make. The database failure was caused by corrupted validation protocols. Every backup restoration attempt spread infection deeper because the system was using compromised verification to check its own integrity. He kept his explanation concise, technical enough to demonstrate expertise without drowning them in jargon. I bypassed automated recovery, deleted the corrupted files, and forced regeneration from clean archives. Total downtime was 3 minutes 40 seconds. After 5 hours of consultants failing to diagnose the problem, Christopher Wade's statement landed somewhere between question and accusation. They were looking for complex solutions. Sometimes the answer is simpler than people expect. Robert's attention sharpened, his gaze moving between Elijah and Victoria with calculation that suggested he was piecing together a narrative they hadn't explicitly shared. And you work here, you're on Victoria's technical team. The question invited lies that would make everyone's afternoon easier. Pretend he'd always worked at Apex, that his presence in the lobby was routine rather than the result of decisions that had almost sent him home to explain another rejection to a 7-year-old girl who believed her father could save anyone. I interviewed here this morning. The truth came out before caution could stop it. For senior cloud architect position. Amanda leaned forward slightly. Interviewed, past tense. Does that mean you work here now, or? As of about 10 minutes ago, yes. Ms. Ashford hired me after I fixed the crisis. The three investors exchanged glances that communicated volumes in the space between heartbeats. Robert's expression shifted through several states too quickly to track individually, settling finally on something that looked like amusement, mixed with deeper assessment. Interesting timing. Why weren't you already employed here if you had the expertise to solve what all those consultants couldn't? The question hung in the lobby air like detonation waiting for spark. Victoria's posture stiffened. Tyler, still hovering nearby, suddenly found reason to check his phone with intense focus. Elijah felt the weight of choices, tell comfortable lies that protected everyone's reputation, or speak truth that might cost more than afternoon gains. Zara's voice lived in his head, absolute faith rendered in crayon. You're the smartest daddy in the universe. Because I'm a single father, my interview this morning went well until I mentioned having a 7-year-old daughter. After that, the conversation became about my commitment capacity, my availability, whether family obligations would interfere with professional responsibilities. He kept his voice level, facts without editorial, letting the story speak for itself. I was rejected. Then I saw the crisis from the parking lot and came back to help anyway. The silence that followed Elijah's statement stretched across the lobby like a crack in glass, one that would either hold or shatter depending on what happened next. Robert Caldwell's expression cycled through surprise, calculation, and something that looked uncomfortably close to recognition. You came back. Robert's voice carried weight beyond the simple observation. After being rejected, you saw they needed help and returned anyway. My daughter believes I save people. I couldn't drive away and then look her in the eye tonight. Amanda Cross pulled out a tablet, her fingers moving across the screen with the precision of someone gathering data to support conclusions already forming. Victoria, is this accurate? You rejected Mr. Brennan this morning, then hired him this afternoon after he solved your crisis. Victoria's composure held, but something in her shoulders suggested the weight of judgment from people whose opinions mattered to her company's survival. That's correct. We made an error in our initial assessment, one I'm committed to ensuring doesn't happen again. An error. Christopher Wade's repetition carried skepticism that cut deeper than disagreement. You rejected someone capable of solving in 45 minutes what 50 consultants couldn't fix in 5 hours. That's not error, that's systemic failure. Robert raised a hand, silencing his partners without looking at them, his attention locked on Elijah with an intensity that felt like being weighed against standards invisible, but absolutely present. Mr. Brennan, why did you really come back? The truth, not the version that makes you look noble. The question deserved honesty that might cost him the job he'd just accepted minutes ago. Elijah thought about Zara's card in his pocket, about Eleanor waiting for news about the 17 companies that had looked at him, and decided he wasn't worth the complexity his life represented. Because walking away would have meant they were right about me. That being a single father made me someone who chose personal comfort over professional responsibility. His voice steadied as truth found its footing. I came back to prove to myself that I'm better than their assumptions, and maybe to prove it to them, too. Robert's face shifted, something softening around the eyes that suggested personal recognition beyond professional assessment. He turned to Victoria with expression that had moved past calculation into something more human. Victoria, we need to talk. Conference room. Now. The conference room on the 10th floor overlooked Austin from windows that framed the city like a painting of success. Robert settled into his chair with the ease of someone who'd sat in hundreds of conference rooms and knew his presence changed the power dynamics regardless of whose building hosted the meeting. Victoria, how much of our investment was contingent on demonstrating system stability? Her jaw tightened fractionally. The entire deal. You needed proof we could scale safely. And this morning's crisis would have killed that proof. Not a question, a statement delivered with the precision of someone who'd built wealth by recognizing when companies were one problem away from collapse. Yes. Amanda leaned forward, her tablet showing graphs and projections. Without resolution, you'd have lost the Series C funding, which means no Denver expansion, probably layoffs within 90 days. Marcus spoke for the first time since they'd entered. We had consultants working around the clock. The problem was extraordinarily complex. The problem was solvable by one person in 45 minutes. Christopher's interruption carried sharp edges. One person your HR department rejected that morning for having a daughter. Robert turned to Elijah, his expression shifting from investor to something more personal. Elijah, I'm going to tell you something I don't usually share in business contexts. I'm a single father too. My wife died in 2008, car accident, drunk driver. I had two sons, 8 and 6. The revelation landed like recognition of kinship Elijah hadn't expected to find. Robert continued, his voice carrying weight of old grief worn smooth by years. Losing Angela taught me that everything I'd prioritized was backwards. My boys needed their father more than my company needed my ego. So I restructured. Flexible hours. Home by 6 every night for dinner. And you know what happened? Amanda answered for him. You sold it for $300 million 18 months later. Because prioritizing my family made me a better leader, not a worse one. Robert's gaze locked on Elijah. Being a single father doesn't make you less capable. It makes you more focused, more driven to succeed because you have someone depending on you. The words settled into Elijah's chest like truth that had been waiting for permission to be believed. Robert shifted his attention back to Victoria, and the warmth in his voice cooled to investor pragmatism. Victoria, I'm changing the terms of our investment. I'm increasing it from 50 million to 75 million. The silence that followed felt different, shock replacing tension. Victoria's careful neutrality cracked into something that looked like disbelief searching for confirmation. You're increasing the investment. On one condition, Elijah Brennan becomes Chief Technology Officer, and you implement comprehensive family-first policies across the entire company within 90 days. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. Christopher was already typing, probably calculating valuations. Amanda started to speak, stopped, recalibrated. Robert, that's highly unusual. Mr. Brennan was just hired as senior architect. Judgment, I watched him demonstrate this afternoon. Technical expertise that saved this company when everyone else failed. Integrity that brought him back to help people who'd rejected him. Robert's voice carried authority of someone who'd made enough successful bets to trust his own assessment. Those are exactly the qualities I want in a CTO. Elijah felt numbers and titles cascading through his mind too quickly to process. CTO, Chief Technology Officer. I interviewed for a $95,000 position this morning. $240,000 base salary, full equity package, seat on the executive board. Robert delivered the numbers like they were inevitable. Marcus becomes COO. Operations management is where your strengths actually lie. Elijah's technical judgment saved this company. I invest based on who solves problems. Marcus's face cycled through emotions before settling on resignation. Victoria had recovered her composure CEO instincts, recognizing opportunity even wrapped in challenging conditions. Robert implementing family-first policies across the company within 90 days, that's ambitious. That's non-negotiable. How many other qualified candidates have you turned away for similar reasons? I'm betting $75 million that changing that assumption will make Apex more successful. His gaze swept the room. Elijah writes the new policies. You implement them, and everyone benefits. Elijah's hands gripped the armrests. The offer should have felt like pure victory, but something in it felt too large too fast. I don't have executive leadership experience. You have 9 years of technical excellence and judgment under pressure. Executive experience is learnable. Integrity and competence aren't. Robert's tone was gentle but firm. I've built 4 companies. I know which qualities matter more. But underneath the offer lived a question that needed answering. If I take this, what happens to the next single parent who interviews here, not the one who saves your company from catastrophic failure? The regular applicant. Victoria met his gaze directly. They get hired if they're qualified. Full stop. No questions about commitment based on family situation. Fair evaluation based on professional competence. In writing, as official policy. Yes, you'll draft it as CTO. I'll implement it as CEO. Robert's investment funds the infrastructure to support it. Elijah thought about Eleanor waiting with Zara, about the 17 companies that had rejected him, about whether accepting this offer made him collaborator in a system that had tried to exclude him or gave him power to change that system from inside. 240,000, full equity, CTO authority to redesign infrastructure and hiring policies. He heard himself speaking words that would bind him to decisions made in conference rooms. But I leave at 5:30 every day to pick up my daughter. No exceptions. Robert smiled. When my boys were young, I missed their soccer games, their science fairs, their school plays. I'd give back every dollar for the chance to attend what I missed. 5:30 boundary is non-negotiable. Anyone who challenges it answers to me. The handshake sealed agreements that went beyond employment contracts into territory where personal vindication merged with systemic change. The weeks that followed blurred into decisions that rippled through Apex like stones in water. Week 1 brought Elijah's first executive meeting, 20 people watching him with curiosity, the black single father who'd been rejected and hired in the same afternoon, now sitting at the table where strategy got made. Week 2 brought his first hire under new policies. Tamara Richards, 32, black single mother of twins, computer science degree from UT Austin, and 7 years of DevOps experience. Tell me about your support system. Who helps when your twins are sick? Her relief at the question was visible. My mother lives nearby. The twins are in after-school care. I've built a network of parents who cover for each other. Good, because emergencies happen. What I care about is whether you can do the job when you're here, not whether being a mother means you can't do it at all. She'd accepted the senior DevOps engineer position that afternoon, salary that let her quit her second job waiting tables on weekends. Week 4, Graham Sheffield resigned. His departure came quietly, no dramatic announcement, just HR memo about pursuing other opportunities. Week 6, the family-friendly policies went live. 16 weeks parental leave, flexible scheduling with core hours from 10 to 3, remote work 3 days per week for parents, emergency childcare fund providing $5,000 per employee annually. Week 12, first measurable results. Employee satisfaction up 43%. Recruiting applications increased 61%. 3 senior engineers who'd been interviewing elsewhere withdrew their applications, citing policy changes as reason for staying. 6 months later, the quarterly all-hands meeting brought 850 employees together. Victoria announced results that told story numbers couldn't lie about. Retention up 38%, productivity up 27%, revenue growth exceeding projections by 19%. Elijah stood at the back during the presentation, watching employees who knew the policies existed because of changes he'd driven. Tamara caught his eye from across the room, her smile carrying gratitude that went beyond salary. After the meeting, she approached with determination that suggested rehearsed speech. Elijah, I need to tell you something. My daughter Mia had a piano recital last Tuesday. First chair performing solo. At my previous job, I would have missed it. Manager expected everyone in office during business hours, no exceptions. Her voice became unsteady. Here I just told my manager I was leaving at 2 for Mia's recital. He said congratulations and asked me to bring pictures. No guilt, no lying, no choosing between being good mother and good engineer. The gratitude in her eyes made something in Elijah's chest tighten. You deserve that. You always deserved that. Maybe, but I didn't get it until you made them see that parents aren't liabilities. She touched his arm briefly. You're changing lives for parents who'll interview here next year, 5 years from now. Thank you. November arrived 8 months after the afternoon that had changed everything. The email from National Tech Leadership Conference outlined opportunity to speak to 5,000 technology leaders about innovation and workplace culture, specifically requesting focus on family-friendly policies and their impact on company performance. Elijah read it twice, certain he'd misunderstood. Keynote speakers were industry leaders with decades of experience, not CTOs who'd been in position for 8 months. But the invitation was real. Victoria had been copied, her response already present. Elijah, you absolutely should do this. Your story needs to be told beyond Apex. He showed Zara that evening, pulling up the email while she worked on homework beside him. Baby, some people want me to give a speech, a really big speech to thousands of people. Her eyes lit up. Like on TV. Sort of, at a conference where leaders learn about making companies better. Are you going to tell them about me? The question carried vulnerability underneath curiosity. Only if you're okay with it. Because the speech would be about how being your dad makes me better at my job, not worse like some people thought. She considered this seriously. You should tell them. Because other daddies and mommies need to know they can have geese and kids at the same time. The conference took place in Austin Convention Center on a November morning that dawned clear and unseasonably warm. Elijah stood backstage watching technicians test equipment, 5,000 people filling seats in the main hall. Zara sat in the front row, 8 years old now. Healthy with insurance that covered checkups and prescriptions and all the medical care he'd worried about during months when insurance was luxury unemployment couldn't afford. Eleanor sat beside her, having insisted on attending to witness what her faith in him had helped create. The introduction played on screens throughout the convention center. Our keynote speaker brings a unique perspective to questions of workplace culture. 8 months ago, Elijah Brennan was rejected for employment at Apex Dynamics for having a 7-year-old daughter. That same afternoon, he returned to help them solve a crisis that threatened company survival. Today, he's their chief technology officer. Please welcome Elijah Brennan. The applause felt surreal, 5,000 people creating sound that pressed against him like physical force. He walked onto stage, found the podium, looked out at sea of faces that included Zara's in the front row. Good morning, my name is Elijah Brennan. 8 months ago, I was unemployed, desperate, and ready to give up. I'd been rejected by 17 companies. Not because I lacked qualifications, because I have a daughter. He paused, letting the statement settle. Specifically because hiring managers believed that being a single black father made me unreliable, uncommitted, too risky to employ, despite 9 years of excellent performance. The screen behind him lit up with image of Zara's card construction paper with crayon stars. This is what my daughter gave me before that 17th interview. She wrote, "You're going to get the job because you're the smartest daddy in the universe." His voice caught slightly. She was wrong. I didn't get the job. I was rejected. Again. For having her. For loving her too visibly. The audience had gone completely silent. But something happened that afternoon that changed everything. The company that rejected me experienced a catastrophic system failure. I saw the crisis from the parking lot and had to make a choice. Drive away or go back and help people who just told me I wasn't good enough. He looked at Zara, found her watching him with intensity that suggested she understood more than her 8 years should allow. I went back because my daughter had drawn me another picture that afternoon. One that said, "Daddy saves the day." How could I see people suffering and not help? The next slide showed technical details the 45 minutes that had saved company consultants couldn't fix in 5 hours. I fixed their crisis. They offered me a job, the same position they'd rejected me for that morning. And I almost said no. Murmurs rippled through the audience. I almost said no because accepting would have made me exception that proved the rule. One success story that let them continue rejecting the next single parent. His voice steadied. So I gave them a choice. Change your hiring policies. In writing, make it official that family obligations don't disqualify candidates. Or I walk away. The screen showed Apex's policy document. They changed, not just promised to change, but actually implemented comprehensive family-first policies funded by an investor who happened to be single father himself. He gestured toward the data slides. 8 months later, the results speak for themselves. Retention up 38%. Productivity up 27%. Revenue growth exceeding projections. Employee satisfaction up 71%. Recruiting applications increased 61%. Movement in the front row. Zara stood, uncertainty in her posture, then Eleanor whispered something, and she walked toward the stage steps. Elijah's prepared remarks evaporated as his daughter climbed onto the stage, small figure in yellow dress with yellow ribbons standing beside him in front of 5,000 people. "Daddy, can I say something?" The microphone picked up her voice, carrying it through the convention center. He knelt down to her level, bringing the microphone between them. "What do you want to say, baby?" She looked out at the audience at 5,000 strangers. "I want to tell everyone that my daddy is the best daddy in the universe. Not because he got an important job, because even when people were mean to him, he helped them anyway." The silence that followed felt sacred. Zara turned back to Elijah, her voice quieter but still amplified. "You told me that being the bigger person means helping people who don't deserve it. That's what daddies do." He pulled her into a hug, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck, aware that cameras were capturing this moment for recordings that would spread beyond this morning. When he stood still holding her hand, his voice came out rougher than professional polish could smooth. "This is my daughter Zara. She's 8 years old. And she's the reason I do everything I do." He looked out at the audience. To the single parents here, the ones who've been rejected or questioned or made to feel like loving your children makes you less capable. You are not alone. Your children are your strength. Anyone who can't see that is the one with limited vision. The applause started built became standing ovation. But he raised his hand, quieting them. To the hiring managers and leaders, stop assuming that parents are liabilities. Stop treating family obligations like professional inadequacy. Start recognizing that people who manage parenthood and careers simultaneously have developed skills your companies desperately need. He squeezed Zara's hand, felt her squeeze back. The best employees aren't the ones who sacrifice everything for work. They're the ones who bring their whole selves, including their families, into environments that value them completely. Give them that chance. change your policies, in writing, and watch your companies become better. The standing ovation continued as he walked off stage, Zara's hand in his. The green room held people wanting to congratulate him, to ask questions, to get contact information for policy implementation at their own companies. But for now, he knelt down to Zara's level one more time, pulling her into a hug that held gratitude for faith that had never wavered. Thank you, baby girl, for believing in me, for being brave enough to come on stage. She pulled back slightly, her gap-toothed smile carrying satisfaction. Daddy, does this mean we can finally get a dog? His laugh surprised him. Yeah, baby, I think it's time we got a dog. March again, 1 year to the day since the afternoon that had changed everything. Elijah stood in his CTO office on the 12th floor, watching sunset paint Austin in colors that made the city look like promise kept. The framed photograph on his desk showed Zara at 8 years old, almost 9 yellow ribbons still present, though the gap-toothed smile was beginning to fill in with permanent teeth. Beside it, the construction paper drawing from interview 17, carefully preserved behind glass. You're going to get because you're the smartest daddy in the universe. The company had grown. 47 single parents now employed where 5 had been when he'd started. The policies he'd drafted had become industry model. Robert's investment had funded Denver expansion, creating 200 new jobs. 7 other companies had adopted similar policies directly crediting Apex's success. His phone showed email from Victoria's subject line 1 year later. The message was brief. Elijah, 1 year ago today, I made one of the worst decisions of my career by rejecting you. That same day, you saved my company and taught me that excellence comes in forms I'd been trained not to recognize. Thank you for giving us the chance to learn, Victoria. He read it twice, finding forgiveness he hadn't realized he'd been withholding. His response was equally brief. Victoria, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we build afterward. Apex has become model because you were willing to change. That takes courage, Elijah. The apartment they'd almost lost had been replaced 6 months ago with a house. Small 3 bedrooms in a neighborhood where Zara could walk to school. The rescued dog, Lucky, had joined their family. The mortgage was manageable on CTO salary that had grown as company success justified raises and equity that had value beyond paper promises. But more than financial security, the year had brought validation that his worth wasn't diminished by loving his daughter, that parental obligations made him better at work instead of worse. That night, after Zara had fallen asleep with Lucky curled at the foot of her bed, his phone buzzed one last time. Text from her sent from her room. Love you, Daddy. You really did save the day. He smiled, typing response that carried gratitude for faith that had carried them both. Love you too, baby girl. We saved it together. The construction paper card sat in its frame on his desk, Zara's faith preserved in crayon and childish certainty. She'd been right, not because he was actually the smartest, but because her belief had given him strength to keep trying when trying felt impossible, to walk back into buildings that had rejected him, to demand better not just for himself, but for everyone who'd come after. That was what being the best daddy meant. Not being perfect, but being present. Not never failing, but never stopping. Not having all the answers, but refusing to let rejection write the final chapter. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, dreams and disappointments, cycling through lives that intersected and diverged in patterns too complex to predict. But in this moment, Elijah Brennan was exactly where he belonged, CTO of a company that valued him completely. Father to a daughter who'd never doubted him. Living proof that sometimes the universe gives you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it, even if it takes 17 rejections to recognize the path that leads home.